Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment of the weekend show brought to you by Holocrunch Popcorn. Now, being a boy or a man always comes with people hearing be a man, be confident, be brave, be strong. But what about being vulnerable? How are men helping men? How are we trying to become better people? Today's International Men's Day, and we will be highlighting boys and men, with the theme being helping boys and men. And having this conversation with us, we have.
Yeah, we have Rodney Omokachi, who is the host of the Young God podcast. Good morning, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and we have the founder of The Ideal Man, Ujobo Agbo.
Thank
Good morning.
you for having me.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Jobo, let's start with you. The ideal man, why?
So let me just do a background story. First, the classic thing everybody gets to hear about is, oh, a lot is being said or done for women. Why is nothing being said and done for boys? So there's that overall premise, right? But then the most important thing is, at some point we're asking ourselves, how can we help boys and men become the best versions of themselves? I usually say that when you look critically at some of the issues that we talk about in the society, if you look critically at the source of it, you see there is a man gap or there's a boy gap there, right? Even down to issues that affect boys and men, male suicide, things about mental health, incarceration, absentee fatherism, and all of that. We're like, okay, these are the problems, but then how can we solve them? And long term, how can we make it even preventive instead of corrective? So that's the premise upon which we started The Ideal Man. It's The Ideal Man HQ, and then we have certain projects and different, let me say, departments that make part of The Ideal Man.
Rodney, this year's theme is helping boys and men. In what way? Because when I heard that, I was like, in what way do you think boys or men need help, particularly in a society where men are seen as the number one gender?
Well, I think the first thing is to maybe slow down on the idea that masculinity is somehow negative and harmful. I think with all things in society, there's a tendency to misunderstand and for things to be taken to the extreme. So one way we can help boys, help men, help fathers, uncles, is to really establish what masculinity is, what it isn't, and how it actually adds to the flavor of, the dynamic between the genders. So when we talk about things like being aggressive or being, strong and being dependable, sometimes it's easy to look at those traits as somewhat negative or toxic. But I think there's a nice balance. There's a softer lens to look at these things, and also appreciating the role that men play in society. Building things, the structures, the roads, all the things that we tend to take for granted. These are built by hardworking middle-class men, and sometimes it can be very, very discouraging when the narratives downplay the role of men or the positives, the benefits that men bring to society.
So, Rodney, flipping that coin, and you do make a very valid point, but just picking up from what Ojobo had said, the research has shown that male suicides are way higher in the society. And you hear a lot of men saying they don't have, they're not allowed to be weak. We don't talk about vulnerability enough. And so you have to just man up. You have to take whatever life throws at you because there's no other option. So let's talk about being able to be vulnerable as a man.
Well, the first thing I would add to the stats you just laid out about men committing more suicides is that women, on average, attempt more suicides, but they are less successful because they employ less violent means. So they would slit their wrists or maybe take sleeping pills on overdose. But men, they put the guns to their heads, they jump off buildings, and they do things that really, really make things very, very certain that they will not see the next day. But when it comes to the idea that men are not vulnerable or men should be more vulnerable, I think, again, it comes back to the misunderstanding about what masculinity stands for, what it means, what it entails. And I think, of course, there are certain situations where, in the extreme, being too repressed or being too macho can be detrimental. But in general, I think that men have had their own forms of coping. You know, when we talk about FIFA, video games, right? The average woman might see it as nothing, right? But men know what happens when they are bonding over a game, over that friendly competition. You know, when men go out to have a beer, to share a beer, when they watch football games, soccer games, any sports event, right? These are situations where men tend to express their emotions. So you can see in the World Cup, for example, that is just coming, there's going to be a lot of male tears shed when their team, you know, falls out. There's going to be a lot of expression in terms of, you know, when a man is sad because his team lost and maybe his partner has to, you know, take care of him and, you know, be softer with him. So I think there's a tendency to just skew the conversation to the extreme where men are not vulnerable or men don't show anything. But I think if we start to like dive deeper and unpack, men have had their ways and we have to accept that. But what happens though sometimes is in those instances where men do show some vulnerability, we now make it look like it's a negative, or you're being too soft, or you're being too weak. I think we should just allow people to express, particularly men, to express how they express, and you know, take it as human beings being human beings, as opposed to making it too gender specific.
But is there a way we could make boys men, you know, upcoming men, boys? Is there a way we could make them comfortable enough to be vulnerable, to express their emotions, sadness, anger, frustration, whatever it is, instead of, you know, telling them to be strong? Boys don't cry, men don't cry. Is there any way we could do that in order for them to become better men?
Okay. Amazingly, at the Ideal Man HQ, we have a project called the Ideal Man Initiative, right? And over the last 3 years plus, we've been able to provide mentorship structures for boys in schools, over 3,000 boys in the last 3 years. And some of the things that we've seen in trying to break down the whole stereotypical thing and the whole structure of being a man and all of that, using our mentorship platform. So I'll pick up that. What are certain things that we can do to help the boys who are coming behind us? The first thing that we can do is first help them understand the fact that they are humans, right? So that's something we always say, that they are humans first before they are even boys or men, right? To an extent, that helps them connect to who they truly are. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need to consciously create structures, right, that help them grow. So for example, with our project, we're doing, we're working in schools for boys, right? How many do we have? How many of that do we have running in different schools, right? Then we also bring it down to the family. So I'm going to now be connecting towards the father, because somehow as a boy, he learns, we always say that his first form of emotional learning is from his family, especially the dad, right? So what can parents do actively to make sure that the boys that are coming are becoming better men? Is to also, for the father, also show the boy that I am human, I can be vulnerable. It's not every time that I have the strength, right? So mentorship structures in school, helping them understand they're humans, the roles that fathers and role models. Because one of the things that we are also seeing is that there are not so many male role models who are ready to play that mentorship role. So with our project, one of the things that we do is we connect the boys in these schools to different mentors. So we bring mentors, and we don't talk about things that are necessarily masculine. Conversations that have to do with them as individuals, but are not talked about in the family, in the religious spaces, in the school, and all of that. If we can tackle it from all of this, I think we'll be raising a new, amazing generation of men.
Let's talk about patriarchy. We're in a very patriarchal society since time immemorial, and so that's something that is real.
Yeah.
Most of the cases of domestic violence are men against women. It doesn't mean some women don't attack men, but the data shows it's more tilted against women. In helping men, how can we enable men to be more tolerant, to understand inclusion and equity in the society without making it patriarchy first? And we'll start with you, Rodney, then let us reel this in.
I believe there's something to be said about being aware of your own strength growing up, right? So a lot of times, because of the way boys and girls are raised, a lot of men are not even, or let's say boys, they're not even aware of their own strength growing up. So when they now get into situations where they feel the need to be aggressive or violent, they underestimate their ability to hurt a woman who is the fairer gender, who is biologically, weaker, right? So I think it starts with really just educating men as boys as they grow up, that you're indeed, you can hurt somebody, right? Just because your fellow man can take a blow does not mean that a woman can take that. And I've seen situations where a father is trying to educate his son about that, because maybe he has, struck his sister one time. And sometimes if you let that go unchecked, it becomes a pattern. But I've seen a situation where a father is telling his son, you can seriously injure this person. Don't try that again. And so when you have this kind of conversations where a person is made aware of their strength, as opposed to, it just being something that is assumed or implied, then you now become more conscious of how you can, use your power, how you can, control it, and how you can make sure that you only use it at the time when it is warranted and not just willy-nilly. And I think in that way, men become more respectable. They develop self-respect, because self-respect is being aware of the damage you can do to somebody. And if you're not aware, then you're going to be very, very flippant with your strength.
Ojobo, you look like you have something to add.
Sure. So one of the things that we see with patterns like this, especially domestic violence, right, we see that it is specifically a thing of power. And picking up what Rodney rightly said, this is a pattern that we see as the boy grows up. So when he does certain things that show aggression, we pass it into the box of, oh yeah, he's been a guy, right? And so we just permit that. He hits his sister, or he hits other guys when they are playing football and all of that. We leave that pattern unchecked. And then when he grows up, I always say, we do because we know. So it's that pattern that he has known, right, over time, that if you really want things to go your way, maybe you should show some form of aggression, and in many cases, take it physical. Let me take it back a little. I see this as a form of emotional instability, lack of emotional intelligence, right? So it's important that when I talk about this, I try my best to always, when I talk about stuff that has to do with men and boys, I try my best to always make sure that there's a part of structure being brought into it. Because for it to be sustainable, there has to be structure. So recently we started something called the Ideal Man Tribe, and we just bring guys, young guys like us, and we really talk about issues, things that affect us. And it's in those kind of cases that you're able to have conversations like this, right? Like, dude, in situations like this is not what you do, this is how you do this, right? So it's a power thing, is a thing of lack of emotional intelligence, and the only one critical way, there are other ways, but one critical way that we can change this going forward is to have these conversations in structured environments, right? And for the men who are ahead of the guys who are coming behind, help us, and we also help the people coming behind us see that this is not the pattern you should adopt. There are other ways you should be able to express your emotions. And I say it's best when it starts early.
Rodney and Ojobo, thank you so much for joining us. Happy International Men's Day.
Same to you.
Happy International Men's Day.
Happy International Men's Day.
We'll take a quick break, and when we return, more for you on The Weekend Show. Don't go away.